Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Do we have the microphones on? Yep. Good afternoon, everyone, and wanted to welcome you to the LAFCO special meeting, Wednesday, January 31st, 2024. It is 4:02 p.m., and we will commence the meeting with a call to order and a salute to the flag. Tracy, will you lead us today?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And today, with Amy out, we have our pro team here from the county helping assist in running the meeting. So Megan, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Alpine?
Here.
Commissioner Landon?
Here.
Commissioner Lohman?
Here.
Commissioner Mendoza?
Here.
Commissioner Rohan?
Here.
Commissioner Stevenson?
Here.
Commissioner Holmes?
Here.
Commissioner Carl? Here. Commissioner Nisley?
Here.
Commissioner Spriggs? Here. And Commissioner Gustafson.
Here. And I wanted to take just a moment to welcome Sean Lohman from the city of Colfax. He's replaced Trinity Burris as the city's representative on the LAFCO Commission. So welcome, Sean. I'll move on now to item 3 on the agenda, changes and approval of the agenda. Michelle, do we have any staff recommended changes?
No changes. No changes from staff, Chair.
Okay, any board members requesting any changes to the agenda? Okay, would someone like to make a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Now we'll move on to item 4 on our agenda. This is an opportunity for the public to speak to the commission on any subject within the commission's jurisdiction but not appearing on today's agenda. Please submit a speaker card before the first speaker is called and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Looks like we only have a few people out there, so we don't need the cards. But items from the public will be taken under consideration without discussion by the commission and may be referred to staff. So with that, I'll open up. Are there any members of the public that would like to address the commission today? I'm not seeing any in the room. Are there any online that would raise your hand if you'd like to address the commission? Not seeing any online, so we'll move on then. Item 5 today is a presentation from Greg McKenzie on the Placer County Conservation plan for the commission. And Greg, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to hear your presentation and bring the commission up to speed on our Placer County Conservation Program.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Greg McKenzie, Placer County Conservation Program Administrator. Glad to be here today to give you an overview of the Conservation Program. Adopted by the Board of Supervisors, the City of Lincoln, and the other permittees back in 2020, became operative in the spring of 2021. So we've been implementing now for 3-ish years, and I'll have a couple of slides on the successes of that implementation thus far. So we do have some crossover between LAFCO and the conservation program. It's really around Cortese, Knox, Hertzberg, and the requirements in your policies for open space and agricultural preservation. And so that's where there are some connections between, county general plan policy around open space and agricultural conservation and policies that you all have in your rules and policies. So I'll touch on a few things, but definitely want to allow time for questions at the end, and we'll see if my handy dandy thing works here. So Placer County Conservation Program, who are the permittees? The county of Placer. The City of Lincoln, the Placer County Water Agency, and the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority, and also the Placer Conservation Authority, which is the joint power agency, which has been set up and formed in 2020 to implement the conservation and mitigation actions of the program. So city, county retain their land use authority. PCWA, it's independent. Sparta, it's independent decision-making authority. So really the Conservation Authority is there to take fees, grant funds, and go do good things with what is collected, including mitigation. So what are the components of the conservation program? So it's a federal habitat conservation program under the National Federal Endangered Species Act. It is also a natural communities conservation plan for the purposes of the state of California and the act that puts that natural communities conservation program into place. Because that was not enough, those two were significant efforts that needed to be made in order to get incidental take permit coverage for development, public infrastructure, public and private projects in western Placer County. Most of our species have water and wetland associations, and so the stakeholders, I was a stakeholder way back when, long before I took this role, we all said, hey, we need coverage for wetlands and waters in western Placer County because you can't split the species from the habitat that they occupy, mostly in and around water. So what came with that, and I could delve into each one of these, and we could spend a half hour on, hey, what's the process for habitat conservation plan for the feds or the state, but really as a function of the permits that everybody from the EPA, the Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Regional Water Quality Control Board, all granted to the permittees under this program. There's a lot of local control that wasn't there before, right? Historically, a project would come into the city or the county, or PCWA had a stick of infrastructure it needed to update, or Sparta transportation infrastructure segment they needed built. And for the city and the county, you would come forward with a project. That project would go through the CEQA process. The CEQA process would end up with a list of conditions and mitigation measures under CEQA that would go to the Planning Commission or Board of Supervisors, same with the City of Lincoln. And you'd end up with a condition that says, go get your state and federal permits. And so you would go start to negotiate those permits for impacts to waters and wetlands of the county and the state and the feds. And you'd end up negotiating over multiple years mitigation ratios, avoidance minimization measures, where you can mitigate. And so really this program took all of that and consolidated it down to a set list of avoidance minimization measures that get applied uniformly, no more negotiations. Perhaps one of the biggest things was no more negotiations over mitigation ratios for wetlands, because we had a broad range of mitigation ratios that required anywhere from the PCP's ratio, which is 1.5 to 1, to 3 to 1, to 5 to 1, to 7 to 1. And you would end up with a project that would go into that agency process, and when it came out, it may not look like what the city or the county or PCWA or Sparta had approved under their authorities, and you had to go back and retool. So it's just this vicious cycle that really the goal was to streamline that all down so that you know when you come in, if you meet the avoidance minimization measures of the program, that you're going to come out of that with a fee that needs to be paid based upon a mitigation ratio that needs to be met. All that translates into dollars that go into the Conservation Authority to implement the program. So what does it cover? It covers natural and semi-natural communities in western Placer County. So everything from rice to grasslands to vernal pools, all the types of habitats that we have in western Placer County that we run into with our projects all the time, including oak woodlands. Oak woodlands typically not something that the Federal Endangered Species Act or the State Natural Communities Conservation Act would say, yes, you need to take care of those. But in Placer County, our fish, we have 2 covered fish species that move up through Dry Creek, Auburn Ravine, Bear River, Raccoon Creek, Doty Ravine. They all end up spawning in our oak woodlands in the foothills, and then out migrating back out, the smoke go back out through the system, and so we needed coverage for those. So yeah, we included oak woodlands in that equation as well. So 14 covered species, all the species that we commonly run into in western Placer County, plus a few that are a little bit more reclusive and you may not know that are out there. Swainson's hawk, constantly being required to be mitigated under CEQA, right? Most every project in western Placer County ends up with a mitigation measure to go buy credits or to preserve lands for Swainson's hawk. Burrowing owls, quite a number of burrowing owl populations in western Placer County. Tricolored blackbird, one of the most recently added state species, so under the State Endangered Species Act, something that California Department of Fish and Wildlife cares a lot about. Fortunately, we had that in the plan and had negotiated all the avoidance, minimization, and mitigation measures for that species before they got around to listing it, but they have since done that. Our foothill species, yellow-legged frog, red-legged frog, obviously our salmon steelhead that make their way through the system, and then the vernal pool species that we run into in the vernal pool habitats in western Placer County. So where are we? On the face of the earth, in the plan area. So western Placer County, basically from where we're at today, west to the Sutter County line, both north and south to the Yuba, Nevada County line and down to the Sacramento County line to the south. Areas that are not included as permittees are the cities of Roseville, Rockland, Town of Loomis, and Town of Auburn. With one side note. So any of those permittees that has a project, for instance, if PCWA has a project of water line or treatment plant in the city of Rockland, because PCWA is a permittee, it has incidental take coverage and wetland permit authority in the city of Rockland for their projects. So this is our famous map for any of you who have been around long enough to know the purple map and the consequences of that map. 50 some odd map iterations over the course of about 7 years that took us to a conservation strategy, something the stakeholders, the city, the county, PCWA, Sparta, and all the state and federal agencies could sign on to say, the purple is the reserve acquisition area. That's where we're going to hold our general plan in place and say, hey, you can continue to do uses allowed by the general plan, rural residential and agriculture in those areas, but we're going to seek to conserve lands in those areas, to go build mitigation, to restore habitats. But also, we have a requirement for 2,000 acres of rice in that reserve system that needs to be in the reserve system at the end of the 50-year permit term. And so within that purple area, we need to conserve 47,300 acres of lands in order to offset the impacts of the general plan growth and development and infrastructure that's necessary in the rest of the yellow area, which is the planned future growth area. It's got Granite Bay in it, it's got Penryn in it, it's got unincorporated Placer County projects in it. It's got areas in the foothills that have oak woodlands in them, but they've been fragmented over the course of time by rural residential development. And so it's not to say that we won't go in there and conserve lands, because we may very well if we find something that fits for oak woodlands or streams or whatnot, but didn't show up real well in this scale of photo or map exhibit. The existing green areas on there, existing conservation in western Placer County includes mitigation banks, open space in and around the city of Lincoln, so between Catavadera and 12 Bridges and Sun City Lincoln Hills. That's kind of right in the center of the map in the city of Lincoln. Mitigation banks, Antonio Mountain Ranch Mitigation Bank, Orchard Creek Mitigation Bank, there's a whole host of them. Silvergate Mitigation Bank up to the north, there's a bunch of them out there. And then the orange ones, which I've got a slide on a little bit later, is all the work that we've been doing since we've been approved to put those lands into conservation, and I'll get there in a second. So just kind of a little bit more finer scale of the prior map showing in the colors what we've been up to, our reserve system units that we either were benefited by the county through its Placer Legacy program, putting into conservation over the years and saying, hey, agencies, we're going to count these. Hidden Falls Regional Park, the Placer Land Trust, Harvigo Bear River Preserve, and others are already preloaded, pre-counted towards the reserve system. So I mentioned before, really how do you lock in that reserve system? Well, when the PCP was approved by the County Board of Supervisors, that came with a general plan policy that basically said, hey, that reserve system, we're not going to do anything that might impede the ability of the plan to meet those conservation objectives because we know and understand what it might do to the rest of the planned growth and development in Western Placer County. And so this general plan policy was put into place. And to this day, we lean on it when people come in and say, hey, we want to build a subdivision out in the far western part of the county. Well, it would be inconsistent with the general plan. And so as we go through general plan amendments over the course of time, this is one of those policies. It'll evolve over time. The board can change that within their discretion, but it's definitely one that we've been leaning on thus far in our implementation. So how's it going? List of all the agencies on any given day. Any of these avatars that are up there could be your state and federal agencies. Some going, yep, it's going great. We love it. It takes permitting kind of out of their realm. They coordinate with us on questions we might have. Others like, we don't like this. We'd rather be hammering away at every project that comes through from a regulatory perspective. And others like, it's okay. We like it. Time will tell. And I kind of have the same thing on a day-to-day basis. Like, today it's going great, but who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So. And normally it's those agencies that vary on a day-to-day basis between right now, it might be CDFW or NOAA Fisheries. So reserve systems, we're sitting around 3,400 acres of lands currently in the reserve system, everything from, I mentioned, Harvigo Bear River Preserve to the Red Wing South, 560 acre lands that were grant funded by federal and state grants. That's one of the upsides of this program and its adoption is it opens up lots of funding opportunities that weren't available to us previously. So the Wildlife Conservation Board for the state of California, very large pot of discretionary funds funded through Prop 68, Prop 1 of old, others that were water, parks, open space grants, the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program, State Department of Conservation, all those get funneled through Wildlife Conservation Board. Because we're a natural communities conservation plan, it opens up that pot of funding, millions of dollars. And so we're doing our best to grab those just as fast as we can. And we have more coming, but I'll talk about the grants more in a second. The plan very much focused on growth and development in Western Placer County, so that's why you see the focus there on vernal pools. Those are the things that get impacted by projects, be it Highway 65, widening and interchanges, or the Placer 1 project, or a new CSU campus, or regional university, or whatever it might be. We're seeing a lot of vernal pools, and it's historically been the one habitat type and the species that were really difficult to deal with the state and federal agencies. So we had an obligation to come out of the gate quickly. The board's direction to me in getting this plan was approved was be ready day one to implement this plan and make sure you get ahead and stay ahead quickly. And so we've been very successful in that with that 3,400 acres. And the chart on the left, the stated acres at the bottom, is direct conversion with the 691 acres. So in the first 3 years, roughly, of planned implementation, we've seen roughly almost 700 acres of land conversion, so covered by the program that received permits in a timely manner. One of those, the Carvana project, right? The very first project that received take coverage from the program, effectively about a week after we got all of our permits in place, they were ready to go. they didn't have another option. They had about 7 acres of wetlands. The Corps said these are not jurisdictional. And they needed our incidental take permit coverage from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to go impact those because fairy shrimp, Swainson's hawk, other species that were on that site, they would have gone somewhere else. So love it or like it or hate it, the Carvana project wouldn't have been here without getting the PCP approved when we did. They would have gone and found an easier site without any wetlands on it and moved forward. And so, as I mentioned, big focus on acquisition of vernal pool habitat. So, we've seen roughly 1,350 acres of vernal pool complex we put into conservation as compared to about 600 acres of conversion of that. So we're well ahead, and the goal is to stay well ahead because the real estate market is dynamic. It is subject to scarcity over the course of time, and as those resources get more and more scarce, more difficult they'll be to acquire. And so the goal, especially there, was to focus coming out of the gate on getting as much vernal pool complex and vernal pool wetlands in the bank as fast as we could, because that's the one thing that's the most constrained resource in western Placer County. So I added the slide in, really not so much to say that, hey, big announcement that came out last fall. Section 6 of the Endangered Species Act takes land or funds from the Land Conservation Fund out of the federal government. Where do those funds come from? They come from the offshore oil and gas lease revenues for the U.S. when those leases are granted to oil and gas companies. They result in revenue, and a portion of that revenue flows into that fund. And we've been very successful between this award, which was announced late last year, and we're getting really close to getting those funds out to acquire 430 acres in this case, because $5.3 million are coming in from the state and feds to make another conservation-funded acquisition happen. And that's the one block that we've been working on of conservation just east of the town of Sheridan. Placer Legacy, we bought the 400-acre Bradley property. It was a jumpstart property. We acquired that before the PCP was even approved. We went and got the Riosa Red Wing Ranch South property, 560 acres, funded with about $7 million of state and federal funds, lots of vernal pools on that site. And the prior award that I mentioned, roughly $5.3 million for Red Wing North. So big block of conservation surrounded by other conservation that's been occurring in that area. Speaking of that area, so between the Red Wing North, the Red Wing South, the Ellis Conservation Easement, the Bradley property, you can see just from the picture, that's why we're interested in this area. There's a very large marsh out there. That marsh happens to have a population of California black rail, which is very important for PCWA water infrastructure, because when they typically in the foothills have wetlands associated with their ditches and canals, they tend to have a likelihood of having California black rail populations, which are protected under the State and Federal Endangered Species Act. Very tight mitigation requirements from the state and feds because they're reclusive, they're hard to find, they happen to like those wetlands in West Placer, and we have to have populations in our reserve system before we can impact them. And good news, there's a big population in that 65-acre marsh on this property, in addition to the vernal pools and other species, burrowing owls on this property. So out in that area, really the total, it's probably higher now in terms of acreage, but state and feds, $12 million, Placer Legacy put in matching funds of about $5 million so far. Mitigation has contributed $5 million, so we're sitting at $22 million worth of local, state, federal funds, developer dollars, grant funds that have flowed into this area just in the first couple of years. So sometimes we get confused between, well, a lot of things, right? Placer Land Trust, okay, is Placer Land Trust different than the Placer Conservation Authority, different than Placer Legacy? Yes. And Legacy is a little bit different than the Placer County Conservation Program. So Placer Legacy is the umbrella general plan policy that says we are going to go chase a habitat conservation program, a natural communities conservation program, and a wetland program to provide incidental take permit coverage, wetland permitting coverage, mitigation options. And so, Placer Legacy very much largely focused on agricultural preservation, but has some similar things to what we do. But we need the dollars out of Placer Legacy to provide local non-mitigation matching funds to do all those things we've been doing under the conservation program. So it's very synergistic, as it is with the Placer Land Trust, right? Separate, third-party, nonprofit conservation organization, and we work daily. We met last week to go, hey, what are you guys working on the foothills? What are you working on the foothills? Let's not compete with one another and drive up the prices. Let's make sure if one of us is working on one property, another one's working on another one, and coordinate our efforts as best as we can so we don't step on one another's toes. And so with that, I've reached the end of my slides. I think I'll leave it there and open it up to questions.
Well, thank you, Greg. I think I'm always amazed, and I think it's great every time we can publicly talk about this program because it gets lost in all of the minutia of development discussions in the county, and what an incredible job we've done preserving so many areas. So I'll open it up to commissioners. Do you have questions? Comments?
I do. Thank you very much for coming and making the presentation. I had not seen the purple map, and I just want to be sure I'm understanding from the perspective of the county doing another general plan update. That map, the purple map, would very much be a base map, would it not, for where development is going to happen and where it isn't? It would be a significant guide about where development could happen.
Yeah, so with the adoption of the conservation program, that purple map largely is the conservation strategy for how we cover general plan growth in the county and in the city and infrastructure development for PCW and Sparta. And it basically says, hey, for all of that yellow area in that map, the planned future growth area where all that growth and development infrastructure is anticipated to occur, we need that purple area out there. Not that we're going to get it all, but we need that to be able to provide the conservation and mitigation to fulfill those requirements. And those requirements would be there with or without the PCP. If the PCP wasn't here, that general plan growth and development would have to go through, survive that timeline and process and all the state and federal agency negotiations that take you 3, 5, 7, 10 years. Under the program, hey, we've got a map, and it shows that that's the area that we're going to just allow ag to continue, and rural residential and whatever's allowed by the current general plan. So yes, it is very much a base, and that general plan policy that's tied to it really says, okay, you need to be consistent with the conservation program and the conservation strategy. If we start chipping away at pieces of that, it has consequences. You lose an increment of growth and development for every piece of that gets chipped off for other uses.
I had 2 more questions, if I could. Yes. So one of the things that is really helpful for me to see is that as we're looking at sphere of influence issues, there really doesn't appear to be any conflict within this plan area in terms of growth being able to happen around the cities, because those areas are in the yellow part of the plan. But the issue is some of the agencies, some of the cities are not part of the program, so they would not have the same level of assurances in resolving those issues. But from a sphere of influence perspective, it isn't inhibiting. Is that right?
Right, yeah, the plan was really developed around ensuring that what was planned to be developed was enabled under the program to be developed.
Okay.
So yeah, definitely not inhibiting any of that growth. It's really, if you will, facilitating it based upon local control, timelines, and costs, and mitigation ratios, and probably a whole list of things I'm not thinking of. Okay. But yeah, to make sure that it did have the capacity to occur. And you need one to make the other one happen, right? To have the conservation happen, you have to have that growth.
Right.
Otherwise, if you don't have the growth, but over 50 years, the assumption is that growth will occur and it will fund that conservation and it'll fund all the mitigation required to make it happen. If it slows down, what are the consequences? Well, we'll see. We've been through already in the first couple of years, fast and slow. Last year particularly slow for whatever reason. There's lots of it out there. We think there's a big pent-up demand, but the fees didn't show it. So where did we focus our efforts? We focused our efforts on state and federal grant funds and went and secured a bunch of lands with their money instead of mitigation dollars.
Right.
Could you pull up the purple map again?
Maybe.
Still have it, Andy? Or no?
The Wizard of Oz behind the
Sorry.
wall back there. If they can pull it back up.
Not a huge deal. If not, it just helps me picture.
Uh-oh. There we go. We're going backwards. It's the one with the purple on it. A couple more. There you go.
Thanks.
For whatever reason, it does have a reverse button. I just found it's very small. Sorry.
Shanti, did you have a question?
No, I don't have a
or-
question. I just
Okay.
wanted to visualize.
My last question is, well, I think that this was a very elegant way to solve resource problems and to speed economic development in this plan area. I'm curious about whether or not you think the county is going to experience dealing with some of these resource agencies as they do the general plan update in the areas outside of this plan area. And it's relative, I think, to us from the perspective of looking at spheres of influence for cities that are not inside this plan area.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a crystal ball type of question with the agencies.
I'm asking you to speculate.
And they can be all, I have a monthly meeting with all of them.
I'm
It's
sorry.
the worst day every month, right? EPA, Corps, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, Regional Board, CDFW. It's 2 hours. And it's basically, them hit me with questions and me with questions for them as well. It's like, okay, state and federal agencies, if there is a project that's inconsistent with this conservation program or not covered by it, are you going to have our backs effectively and require, as you would otherwise, all of the same requirements at a minimum? You could require more, but at a minimum, you need to match the conservation mitigation measures that we've said are important to Western Placer County and to balance the growth and economic development. Some are really good, some are hemming and hawing as typical, but I would expect as the county comes forward with the general plan amendment, those agencies will all be on the list and they'll be looking over our shoulders going, are you following the plan?
Right.
I would suspect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rohan. Are there other questions, comments? I'll hit you with one then. Vernal pools, on the mitigation
Yes.
for a project, is it 1.5 to 1? Or is it?
It is 1.5 to 1. And so the way our fees work, it's basically for any lands being converted, regardless of the use, subdivision or use permit or stick of infrastructure. So it's that underlying land, the parcel land base. And okay, well, if you're going to impact that, we have to replace that land. And on top of the land that we go by, all those lands that were on the screen, we have to build vernal pools. And
50% more.
yeah, if we impact pretty much any wetland in Western Placer County, streams being the exception, but vernal pools, seasonal wetlands, things that are providing habitat, 1.5 to 1. Historically, if you were to look across projects, you could be 3 to 1, 5 to 1, 7 to 1, depending upon how much the agencies cared about that. So yes, low mitigation ratio, but I'll use the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's talking point on this. It's not more mitigation, it's better conservation. And so why do they allow a lower mitigation ratio here? Because it's a interconnected, very large reserve system managed by one entity, uniform measures with monitoring and reporting. It's kind of historically a hodgepodge of an island of avoidance over here and an island over there, and maybe they were managed and maintained, maybe they weren't. maybe the species are okay in those constrained areas, but is there any genetic crossover because they're on an island? Probably not. And so the agencies prefer this approach to the traditional go negotiate with them for years and come out of it with a different looking project that has to come back through the land use authorities for reapproval and then more permits. And yes, hopefully this, this was designed to be the better way. And so far I would say it is the better way.
Oh, absolutely. And often those areas where they would try to establish vernal pools weren't necessarily successful versus these broader areas.
Yeah, and I really should have included a slide on it, but the very westerly orange dot out there in the purple area was our first, and we did it at risk, the Markham Ravine Mitigation Project. We did that with Corps' approval. It's roughly 300 acres, about 50 acres of vernal pools and other wetlands on it. It was basically irrigated pasture, but historically it was vernal pools that got converted into irrigated pasture. We restored those vernal pools very successfully. So it was really our demonstration project right out of the gate. When you see aerial photos of that, it's pretty apparent what happened there and the success it's having. Markham Ravine flows right across the top of it.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
I have one question. I was wondering, Greg, could you maybe speak to if a jurisdiction or an entity or a project would like coverage under the PCCP but is not part of the PCCP, what would they need to do in order to get that coverage?
Yes, we do have provisions written in the plan. One of those took a long time to negotiate, but it's called the Participating Special Entity Programs. Let's say, for instance, City of Rockland had a project that required state and federal permits, required mitigation, but that it's just a very difficult conversation to have, whether it was 10 years ago or today. So in all likelihood, the agencies are going to be, hey, go talk to the PCA and Greg and see if there might be an option for you to be a participating special entity to receive incidental take permit coverage, and under that wetland permitting and under that mitigation fees to get that project through the process. It's not up to staff. That, to be considered, it has to be a project that fits the plan, right? It's got to avoid and minimize and ultimately mitigate consistent with the plan. So the entity approving that project would have to say, yes, we were asking for coverage. So you'd have to come in, have staff review it, make sure it's consistent, come to the first, for the City of Rockland, and get them to say, yeah, we'd like to apply for coverage. Get the Placer Conservation Authority Board, the JPA, to say, yes, we're not giving up too much of an increment of our take permit coverage for this project. We have enough mitigation. So that's a conversation to have. And then all the state and federal agencies have to give it a nod. Yes, you can cover this project. It is consistent. It makes sense for coverage. So we've done it, as you know, as a member of the other board you serve on. We did it for the Nevada Irrigation District for their Hemp Hill diversion project that was diversion seasonally put in, taken out, barrier to salmonids upstream of the city of Auburn, right on the Turkey Creek Golf Course. Ultimately, lawsuits led to that being timely removed, but they ran into a problem. They couldn't get their state and federal permits and implement that program under the settlement agreement that they had. So they came to us and the PCA and said, hey, will you please cover us? We did. They had their permit 60 days later and constructed the project. And yeah, it's a good success story for that. As some of you may know, it was designed to be a participating special entity. It actually ended up working out a little bit differently, but the Amoruso project, Brookfield's Amoruso project in the city of Roseville, also came in through the conservation program because, again, he had been working on that, had mitigation properties, just could not get the agencies to budge. And they said, go talk to the PCA and Greg and see if there's an option for you to mitigate and get coverage through the conservation program. And they did. And he got his permits and the project's being built, and another success story. I don't have any bad stories yet. But as Albert reminds me when I do see him in meetings, it's not all unicorns and rainbows. Stuff happens in the agencies. We still have to deal with the agencies, and they still have to deal with us. And yeah, there will be things that pop up that we have to adapt to over time because we're early, 3 years in a 50-year program.
Thank you so much, and I don't see any other hands. Go ahead, Michelle.
So, Greg, we actually, later on in our agenda, we have our work plan, and it's just, a snapshot of where we're at in the work plan. But there's a couple of projects on there, and I noticed that one is in the yellow area. It's in a non-participating agency's sphere, but it's in the yellow area. And then we have other projects that are, City of Lincoln, which is a participating and a permitting agency. So I was wondering, does LAFCO notify the PCCP? And what does that look like when we have, those types of projects? Like I said, two very different scenarios.
Yeah, I would say yes. It's probably the city or whatever entity it is that's proposing the project that's going through that initial pre-application, application, approval process, probably before it gets to LAFCO, and so we should be hearing about it beforehand. As you may know, there is a very specific CEQA guidelines requirement for projects to be reviewed for consistency with an adopted habitat conservation plan or natural communities conservation or other plan. I think it's item K or something in that long list of things to consider. And that's one of them that we point everybody to. Is that project consistent with the conservation program that's been adopted? If it's not, you might have a challenge making the findings to approve that project otherwise. We try to help our partners make those determinations because that's what we're here for, right? The PCA has no land use authority. We're advisory to city, county, PCW, and Sparta to make sure we're all implementing the permits correctly. And we stay in compliance with them because we're all connected at the hip in those permits. And if one of us doesn't implement it correctly, we all don't implement it correctly by the view of the agencies, and they can revoke our permits or require other things of us. So it behooves us to cooperate.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. We'll move to the public. Are there any public who would like to speak to this? Yes.
Oh, God.
Uh-oh. Are you in trouble?
This is my husband.
Yes, full disclosure.
Einer Mesh, I just want to, I have one of the reasons that, one of the benefits that PCWA got out of this that doesn't get mentioned very often, but I like to bring it up, or I used to like to bring it up when it was my job to bring it up, is, PCWA operates all these canals throughout western Placer County, and we go out and we clean them, and dirt gets down creeks, and then we gunite them, and we do all these projects. We do them every year, and we've done them for 100 years, and the issue is that I was scared to death that the resource agencies would come out and say, you need a take permit in order to clean that canal, and this, anyway. So one of the things that we got out of this PCCP was coverage, incidental take permit for all of our routine canal operations, which I think was a huge success for the agency. But I've always been curious about the purple. So the solar project, the SMUD solar project, isn't it in the purple? How does it fit? Oh, it's not.
Yeah, so the Smud Country Acres project. It is in what the county terms to be the Curry Creek plan area, not really a plan, study area out west of the city of Roseville, just right on the edge of the Sierra Vista project. Curry Creek does flow through the Country Acres project. So that project, about 1,000 acres of solar by Sacramento Municipal Utility District. So one of the things we've been working on with them is, okay, well, you're going to convert 1,000 acres of rice. That's habitat for things like Swainson's hawk, although they're not a covered activity. Why are they not a covered activity? Because the state and federal agencies told us when we were negotiating the plan that you can't cover utility scale wind and solar projects. Why not? Because we don't think, the agencies at the time didn't think that we could estimate the level of effects from a project like that. That wasn't understood well enough for us to say, yeah, we know, like we do on development, what the impacts will be. Solar is different, wind is different, and the changing landscape of that program. So we negotiated with them over the course of the past 2 years probably to get them to be as consistent as possible. 2 weeks ago, whatever date it was, the Placer Conservation Authority Board heard and approved an MOU with SMUD for them to effectively pay our land conversion fees to mitigate for the effects of that project on agricultural lands. So that agreement has since been executed and it sits, and it's only operative should the Board of Supervisors ultimately approve the Planning Commission's recommendation that says to, yes, the Planning Commission for the county recommends approval to the County Board of Supervisors. My understanding that will be heard on the February 20th meeting as a project. So not done yet, and probably lots of public comments and hearing to go, but that's where we're at.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Mr. Euler.
Good evening. My name is Kirk Euler. I am a member of the Placer Conservation Authority Advisory Board, and I was a 13-year member of the ad hoc committee that developed this happy little map that you're seeing right up here right now. And before I get to my comments, just quickly in response to Ms. Rohan's question about the general plan base, you're absolutely right. In fact, when our board adopted this map as part of the conservation plan, we did a general plan amendment in order to adopt this map, because the old map that we adopted in '94, which I had the pleasure of working with Alex Frere and a few others on, actually showed the future study area, future growth area for Placer County going all the way out to the Sutter County line and then up above the Parkway and Roseville's piece up there to Pleasant Grove Creek. So a whole bunch of what's in purple on this map was in the future study area in the '94 general plan. So yes, we actually adopted this map, thereby amending our existing general plan to reflect this map when we adopted the conservation plan, and this, of course, would be the land use basis for any future general plan. So you're right with that. My comments today mostly go to the issue of establishing spheres and my longstanding belief that urban growth should happen in the cities. And back in 2011, the Board of Supervisors voted to authorize Supervisor Wygant and myself to chat with the city of Roseville about coming into the conservation plan. And at that time, the board, September 13th of 2011, the Board of Supervisors authorized us to go to Roseville and say, if you, Roseville, come into the conservation plan, everything south of the Parkway will become future growth area for Roseville. So Placer 1, everything you see off to the west that's in yellow. And then everything north of the Parkway would go to Lincoln, and the Board of Supervisors would just play the role of administrator for the conservation plan. After about 14 months of some conversation and some back and forth, the county in March of 13 sent a letter to then City Manager Ray Carriage from David Bosch, basically saying, okay, we need a decision because we're at a point where we have to move forward with this plan. We need a decision. And the city was given 3 options. Option 1 was elect not to participate. Option 2 was elect to participate on just the future growth area. Option 3 was elect to participate on everything, and we'll give coverage to within the city of Roseville as it sits right now. And so in a letter back to the Board of Supervisors, in April of 2013, Mr. Carriage replied, the City of Roseville will elect to receive regulatory coverage of the plan assigns to, could elect to receive regulatory coverage to the plan assigns to the area outside of the existing city, should the city choose to pursue annexation of those areas in the future. To receive PCCP regulatory coverage for such projects, the city understands the plan would require amendment and some level of city participation in plan implementation and oversight. So the reason I want to make those comments today is the last formal action by the Roseville City Council was to say, we're not in and we're not interested. And so while I very much would love to see all future urbanization in the cities, Lincoln, Roseville, step one really needs to be the City of Roseville going to the Conservation Authority, at the time would have been the county, but we're going to the Conservation Authority and requesting coverage, just like the example Greg gave NID did on the Hempfield debt. That was step number one. Go to the Conservation Authority, request the coverage, and then let's talk about sphere of influence.
Well, thank you for that history lesson, Mr. Euler. I appreciate it very much. And I can't remember what I did yesterday, let alone what I did in 2011 or 2013. So thankfully, I think sometimes. Is there anyone else from the public here in the room? Mr. Schreiber, no? Okay. Anybody online that would like to address the commission on this item? I'm not seeing any hands up, so thank you very much, Greg, for this presentation. This was information only, and the commission has been going through a number of these presentations, both on policies and programs, to make sure we're very clear as we move forward on the information we need as background that not all of us have, and we have experts in the room that always provide that. So thank you. We'll move on then to item 6 on our agenda. This is our consent calendar. On this, we have 2 items, our minutes from November 8th and our financial reports, October through December. Do any commissioners have any items they wish to pull for discussion? I'm not seeing any. Are there any members of the public that would like to pull an item for discussion? Not seeing any. I'd entertain a motion.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Okay, 1 abstention. Thank you. We'll move on to item 7, our business items for today. Item A is the status update fiscal year 23-24 final work plan. Item 14, policy review. This has been continued from our November 8th meeting. And Michelle, I assume you're going to lead us through this?
Oh, yes, Chair, thank you very much. As you mentioned, this is a continuation or an item that was continued from our November 8th meeting. And I believe the direction from the commission at that time was to bring back this item for discussion, and that the commission would provide direction to its ad hoc committee and staff on which policies to prioritize for the, well, certainly for the remaining of the fiscal year, but also moving forward.
Commissioners, are there any points that we want to discuss? Commissioner Rohan.
Yes, I'd like to bring up that at our November meeting, I think it was, I had suggested that we look at some of the LAFCO policies from counties around California, where counties were in the development business as well as cities, so that we can look at models for how we rework the policies that we have in place, because those policies were put together at a time when there was an anticipation that development would happen only in the cities. And the counties that I looked at were Riverside, San Diego, and San Bernardino County, as well as Santa Cruz. And they were shared with the other commissioners through Michelle. it was really interesting to review them. There's a couple of takeaways that I'd like to share. First of all, it becomes really clear that these policies are not just an internal document. They're policies that are used by the public. They're used by private consultants. They're used by the cities and by special districts, trying to understand what the rules are in order to get ready to go through a process or evaluate whether or not they want to. And our policies are an amalgamation of actions and decisions made over a 20-year period of time. And they really do need to be put in order for the public or anybody to really effectively use them. Also, there were some really interesting components to a couple of the LAFCO policies. Some of them actually had all of their personnel policies, all the policies on vacation days, raises, the whole 9 yards. And my initial thought was, that's kind of unusual. But we are a commission that comes together once a month or on an as-need basis. And when personnel issues come up, it's really nice to know what the rules are as commissioners, especially if you're sitting in a chair position or a vice chair position. So I think that it's not a bad idea for us to consider looking a little bit more closely at those counties that have LAFCOs that have included that information inside their policies. As for some of the specifics, what I saw in these LAFCO policies is that some of them set up advisory committees who would work with the executive officer in advance of items coming to us. So the city managers would meet with one member of the county, and the county chooses who that is, whether it's their executive director, their CEO, or their planning commissioner. But it makes sure that everybody knows what's going on and there's input offered early in everybody's processes to try to identify where there's going to be conflict and how to collaborate. And I think it sends a message of collaboration, which I think we've all talked about, wanting us to be considered as a collaborator as opposed to just a regulator. The policy committee, we were supposed to come up with some ideas on where to prioritize because the policies are pretty lengthy. I think that the area of spheres of influence would be most helpful so that the city, and I think in what I read in these policies is that LAFCO is sort of a place for those conversations to happen, as opposed to the driver, and that they can be the determinations that can come out of collaboration don't have to be one size fits all. It provides more information up front for the special districts to know what's going to be happening in the sphere of influence areas. And I think just the private sector, the property owners, are going to have a lot more information if we move into that policy area first. And I realize we've got some staffing challenges in the short term, but these policies should be informative for these general plan updates that are happening, because I think Auburn is doing one. Colfax is out of the plan area, right? We're all still going to have to deal with sphere of influence issues. I think it's time to move there. And one of our options would be to consider getting bids from consultants to actually develop some policy options for us and come back and we work through them in that fashion. Otherwise, we can use our committees or wait for staff to be able to get at this. But I really hate to see this keep lingering.
Thank you, Commissioner Rohan. Comments from other commissioners or on that, or response from Michelle, how about? I mean, as we approach this, I think you've been leading us through the revision of so many of our policies that were outdated and antiquated. And, you know, do you see this as something we'd like to budget for with consultants to look at the sphere of influence with recommendations for changes in our policy? Or from your experience, would we look at
So my
staff doing that work?
Right. So my experience was staff working with the city planners and the special districts. It was really the general managers, because most special districts don't have planners. But in my previous county, those groups were already established, and all those monthly meetings, they occurred naturally. So I think to get something off the ground, we would need to contact our cities, our special districts, the county, and to see what level of interest they would in participating, to collaborate on a policy, on policies. You could do that. You could hire a consultant. You could have staff prepare drafts, and we edit along, with the policy committee. It's just, I'm worried, as I mentioned, because we had in my previous LAFCO, the LAFCO staff had monthly meetings with, everyone in the same room, all of the planning staff from the cities, the county planning staff, the transportation planning, water. We would gather. It's like a working group. And we would report to an executive committee, which is the city managers and the CEO. And then, so we don't have those in place. And so that's what worries me about approaching everyone to get that going. And then once we get it going, we start working on the policies.
Yeah, I think that the challenge for us is, Michelle came from a county where the voters made a decision that development was going to happen in the cities. Mm-hmm. And they were very quick as a county and cities in that county to organize to make sure that everybody had input. We have not done that here. But we're still walking into it, general plan updates and discussions about MSRs and spheres of influence, and we don't have operative policies. And we went through an uncomfortable one in Lincoln recently. And I would like to suggest that at our next meeting, you come back with a recommendation on how we move forward, especially with sphere of influence.
Well, at least checking with our jurisdictions to see if they're willing to participate is what I'm hearing from you, because they haven't done that, and yet these requests we know are coming in. Are they willing to participate up front so that each jurisdiction isn't taking our time and energy away and trying to wrangle these issues together? It just seems like some more proactive discussions would benefit us all, and especially the public in the process.
Yes, I mean, if they are interested, if they are willing to take the time and spend the time to go through this, help us develop our policies, then great. But if it's going to just, slow down our progress even more, then that should be something that you discuss.
Well, I'd like to obviously collaborate. I think as one commissioner, I agree with Susan that we want to collaborate with them. We can extend we can send a letter. We might get a letter back, like a letter that we heard of before, but we should extend that and see, given what's going on right now and the general plan processes that we're undertaking, it seems to make a lot of sense to me. How do other commissioners feel?
I agree. I think it'd be a good idea to reach out and see what kind of involvement we can get from other organizations in the county first.
Michelle, are you saying that are you comfortable reaching out to all of the special districts and jurisdictions to establish a working group, like an ongoing working group, not related to this piece, the policy piece, that you would feel more comfortable doing that first and then trying to see if they can engage on the policy level? Or I just wanted to make sure I was understanding what you were saying.
Right. So I was just worried that we have 37 special districts, and we are going through an election right now. So I'm very familiar with trying to. It's like herding kittens because there's so many, and we have all of the cities. So we have what is that then, like 40 something jurisdictions, right? And so I would like to extend the invitation to everyone so that we don't exclude anyone. I'm just worried that if they're not interested because everyone's busy, they don't have time, then I hate to put our policy work on hold because we're waiting for the 42 agencies, whatever it is. Yeah, I get that.
So how would you propose to move it forward?
Well, no, I mean, that's fine. I will reach out. Certainly, I just, like I said, I was just concerned, but if that is, if I come back at our next meeting and there is some interest, then absolutely. But if there's not interest, then I suggest that we just work with the policy committee. And, if you're interested in providing drafts to the other agencies before you adopt them and give them an opportunity to comment, that might be another way to get their input, but maybe doesn't drag us down with the timeline.
Thank you. I agree with what Susan said. I don't want to have another uncomfortable conversation like we had with Lincoln. But given that we've got a primary in March, after that, I mean, everyone's driving to November, so it's not like we don't have a gap there. But I don't think it would be unreasonable, and my fellow commissioners, correct me or chime in if I'm wrong, but I would like to see by the next meeting at least what your attempts have been to reach out to those 40 or 30, maybe 40, 30, no, 30.
Yeah, 37
40,
plus 6
37
in
plus,
the county.
Yeah, whatever it is. And you're right, some of them may brush you off, some of them may be more of a challenge, but I have to believe that out of that, there's probably some low-hanging fruit somewhere. So by next meeting, I'd just like to know, you might be able to cross 10 or 12 or off your list or even more. And let's get that out of the way and banked. And then we can focus, or you can focus, or we can collaborate on this and how we get those remaining ones to get on board, either one way or the other. But I don't think it would be unreasonable to get a status update from you by next meeting as to just where we are as far as the ask. Because, I mean, the answer is always no until you ask, right?
Yes,
So I think we should at
absolutely.
least open the conversation. That's
Absolutely.
my 2 cents. Thank you.
And I would say, I'm sorry, go ahead, Supervisor.
My concern is that this is going to be an immense workload for our limited staff. And I don't know if we have to go up with a consultant or hire someone to manage this proposal. So I know we've got a lot on the books already. I think it's probably best to put this off until we get caught up with some of the work that the LAFCO staff has to do.
Understanding that, I'm wondering if the question is more, would you like to have a committee and work on this, or would you prefer to review the draft policies as we bring them forward?
You guys can meet.
Because, no, I'm looking at you too, but looking at Michelle saying perhaps that's the way to approach it, because I know everybody's workload is probably, they'd rather review and edit somebody else's work than necessarily get in the trenches and draw out a long process. So however we generate that discussion and opportunity is fine with me to minimize your workload, but also to engage them and reach out and make sure they're at least willing to try. And I don't think many of the special districts, a lot of the special districts will be excluded. I mean, they won't be interested. So you'll really be looking at our cities, PCWA, and a few others that may participate at all in this. Yeah, and those will probably be the easy ones. That's one thought. Josh?
Well, okay, there we go. Yeah, I think like, where we're at is, ask Michelle, reach out, see if there's an interest. Come back next meeting and say that there is an interest, if there is an interest of this group here. And then we still, bring it back to whether we want to carve it up to have our committee and how to utilize this interest, this group that showed interest, or is there a lot of interest and maybe we should get a consultant or something like that? But the first, I could, from what I'm understanding from the commission here, is to reach out and see if there's interest among the participants of special districts, cities, et cetera, of LAFCO, if they would like to be part of our policy and doing policy, and seeing how that comes back to us, how that drive a decision of how we're going to tackle our procedures, and what we could probably start breaking up the work of what could be done maybe with our local committee, maybe what could be done with the consultant, and using this other group as a peer review group or as a participation group of review or to add interest. But we'd have some idea of what we're looking at of the participants and as a working group, as a collaborative effort in updating our policies.
Yeah, and
Is
I
that
think,
kind of where it's at?
I think so, Michelle, and I think, Michelle, you should set out your expectations on timeline, because we can't hold up the work of LAFCO for too long. So either people are willing to commit and come in and work with us, or we've got to move forward, and maybe they'd prefer to just review what we've done and have some study sessions on that. I don't want to see us hold up our work for a process that may not be effective
Okay.
and take too much staff time, so.
No, I can do that. I can report back on the level of interest at the next meeting. But since we are going through multiple elections, it's a good time since I have their attention.
Any others, Commissioner Rohan, that you wanted to bring up on the policies? Okay. Is there any public comment on that item? I think we've given our staff direction then, and we'll move on to item 7B, status update, fiscal year 23-24, final work plan.
Thank you, Chair. This is very similar to the process we tried last year, and it seemed to work out really well. It's just a check-in at mid-year to let the commission know which projects have been completed, which projects are ongoing, and some projects that we have not been able to get to for various reasons. And then also just to ask for from the commission any amendments or changes, et cetera, that you would like staff to complete. So there is a couple of items that are high priority items. And also I want to point out, because I did receive a couple of phone calls about, not from the commission, but from members of the public about our priority ranking. For example, number 1, which happens to be mostly in El Dorado County in that project. I just numbered them so that I could easily refer to them. It does not imply that my number 1 priority is the reorganization of 2 fire districts, and 1 is in El Dorado County. So I just wanted to clarify that. But item number 10 and item number 11 on this list, the South Placer Municipal Utilities District, which is our sewer district that includes the cities of Rockland and Loomis and parts of unincorporated areas, including parts of Granite Bay, et cetera. I did go out for an RFP, but I heard from 3 consultants or consulting firms who are interested, but they do not have the bandwidth at the moment, and so they did not submit bids. I did talk to the district staff, and they would like to wait a little bit into the calendar year to maybe reissue the RFP. And then the other item that I wanted to bring to your attention is the City of Colfax. You'll see in the correspondence that staff submitted a comment letter to the EIR. And so I think it would be beneficial if we put off that item until the City of Colfax has adopted their EIR, or at least close to adopting the EIR and the general plan, so we have a more substantial document, and that may take us into the next fiscal year. So I just wanted to point out those two items. And then also some good news. We do have an open recruitment for our new position, and we're hoping to fill it at the assistant executive officer position, because you may recall that earlier in the fiscal year, we went out for a analyst 1-2 position, and we did not have very good luck. We did receive a number of applicants, but they all have education. That, you know, they had either a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, but no experience, and we were looking for someone with a little bit more work experience. So that will close February 8th, and so I'm hoping at the next meeting I'll have a very good report on that front. And then otherwise, if you have any questions or concerns for me or any directions, please let me know.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Are there questions for Michelle? I'm glad we were able to remove 2 of your 17 high priority items with a nod like that, because that was a lot of high priority items for the mighty staff of 2 that we currently have. We'll move, is there any public comment on our final work plan mid-year status report? I'm not seeing any in the room. Any online? Okay, we'll move to item 7C, lease of administrative office at 110 Maple Street, Auburn.
So thank you, Chair. As I mentioned, we have a recruitment out, and so the first item, or one of the things that this item does, is increase the footprint of the LAFCO office so that we can accommodate another person. So if you're familiar with the LAFCO admin office, it's the office that is directly behind my office. And so our landlord has very graciously said that we could take that over. Currently, it's their legal counsel does have that office, but I believe their legal counsel mostly isn't in, and he or she, I don't know the person, but he or she, when they do come in, they'll be able to use one of the other offices. So I thought that was generous of them. And then the other part of this is our current lease expires the end of the fiscal year, so this will extend it 5 years. And then finally, we have sometimes we can have delays in receiving invoices, and also there could be delays in us paying invoices, so we thought it would be cleaner just to do once a year invoice and once a year payment plan going forward.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Stevens?
Oh, I can't turn this on. Oh, I'm pushing the wrong button. You're going to pay rent in advance, 1 year in advance?
Oh, no, so we would pay at the beginning of the fiscal year for the full fiscal year. And the landlord's concern is, and sometimes it was, because they didn't submit an invoice to us on time, they wanted to make sure that all of the rent that we paid is captured in one fiscal year, because when, we're doing the audits, then
I understand. I just think the landlord ought to love you.
Yeah, I know.
I've been a landlord, and I love tenants that pay their rent. I understand, and I also think we need the space if we're going to add a person.
Right.
Your office is a little tight.
Very tight.
It is. So I don't think the paying 1 year or in advance was, or if the commission decides not to do that, it wasn't a deal breaker. In fact, it was my suggestion just to eliminate this arrears and who pays what when, and so we can certainly take that out.
I'm in support of it. Don't take it out.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, it was my idea. So,
any other comments or questions? Is there any public comment on this item? Not seeing any. Did you want us to make a motion on this?
Yes, and it's just to authorize myself to sign the lease agreement and the amendment number 4 to the lease agreement.
Great.
I move we approve amendment number 4 and authorize Michelle to sign it.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. Okay, we'll move on now to item 8, which is our correspondence.
Thank
you
you,
wanna-
Chair. I don't have anything to add, so if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to.
I just thank you. You called in advance to let me know, and I think you let several of us know about the grand jury's response, that I think it was well done, and certainly should have pointed out that we could only respond to what we can respond to.
Yes, thank you. I haven't heard from them since, so. We'll see.
And then we do have the notice in here of the special district voting for their representatives. That's gone out, correct?
Yes, so the call for nominations went out. It ends on February 22nd. So they do have a little bit more time. We have received a few nominations already, and so I anticipate that this may take a few months because there's, this is fantastic. There's so much interest to serve on LAFCO. So.
Michelle, you've changed a lot around here. You're not having to drag people in.
We're very
Okay.
popular.
Any other comments on our correspondence? Any public comment on our correspondence? Okay, then we'll move on to our item number 9, commissioner comments. Are there any additional commissioner comments? Everybody's ready to adjourn? Then I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? I don't see any. Thank you very much for a very productive meeting. Thanks, Michelle. Great to have you back.